Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. You'll notice that this week I am not joined by Dave Russell. Dave Russell gets the week off, and instead we have a specialist who's going to be helping us preview Microsoft Inspire 2021 and really kind of answering the question of why you don't need to back up Office 365. Joining me today is Karinne Bessette. Hi, Ren. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
Oh, not bad. Yeah, so we're going to talk about why you don't need to back up Office, right? So it's natively durable, it's fully protected already, it's covered. That's actually not what we're going to exactly talk about along the way. Now, Ren, you are not joining us from home. You have actually made it into a real office. Where are you located this week? Columbus, Ohio. So I am from the great state of Texas. We have Ohio represented. We have our producer in Georgia. All right. I love it when Canada is at the beginning of the hour because so much of the map turns green. Let's see who else we got. So we got France is in the house. I would think they'd be celebrating right now. Romania's in the house, our production company. We've got India, always good to see them. It's amazing how they always join in no matter how late it is. So we've got lots of folks piling in. Please weigh in the comments. Tell us where you're from. But with no further ado, let's get into the topic at hand. So what I thought I'd do, Ren, is we've done a lot of industry research over the last year and a half looking at different dynamics of data protection strategy. One of the questions that came out in our data protection trends report was around, is your organization actually backing up Office 365? We've asked this question year over year, and actually I was really kind of pleased with some of the results. If we could bring up slide one. What you'd look at here is that in the darker green, that's 2020's response. The brighter green is 2021. If you looked a year ago, about 70% of organizations said we rely on the recycle bin. And that number is down to under 50% in just 1 year. And notably, by the way, it looks like the most of that shift happened by the absorption of a third-party backup product. And my guess is those folks on the right-hand side, they just haven't figured it out yet. Ren, what's your reaction to this kind of a shift in 1 year? Are people just understanding? Is it an evolution of the tools? Why do you think we're seeing that shift?
So I would like to take some credit for that. Veeam has done a big campaign in teaching. It's not just telling people, yes, you need backup, but teaching the shared responsibility model, teaching the reasons why you would actually lose data, and then proposing challenge to administrators to delete something that's 30 days old or restore something 30 days old back to the original environment. And once it starts to churn, wait, you mean eDiscovery doesn't do that? No, eDiscovery is not meant for restoration back to original environment. It's meant for things like legal discovery for a court case so you can hand it over, not so you can get it back to your end users. And I think that's what I'm stealing your thunder a little bit there.
No, I like that. And one of the things that, every time that you and I have visited Ren off camera, I learn something new all the time. One of the things that I had not realized when we first started talking about Office 365, you referred to the shared responsibility model. And I thought, that seems like it's marketing jargon. And I didn't realize that's actually the official language Microsoft uses to say, it's your data. Right? It's not my data. My job is to stand with the platform. Your data is to back yourself up and all the other stuff that goes along with that. Before we get into the how and the specifics of that, though, and by the way, this for folks that are tuning in, looking at all of Microsoft Inspire 2021, that's the major global partner conference that Microsoft does each year. And so certainly we hope some partners are listening to this and weighing in as part of the dialogue along the way. But before we get into the how for backup, I think one of the things that was most interesting, so we have another piece of research. This is from our cloud trends report where we looked at 1,500 IT decision makers from around the world and what they were doing with production cloud capabilities. And so if we look at slide 2, we asked 2 questions that were kind of related. The question on the left was asking who's responsible for defining the strategy and the requirements for protecting SaaS data. And then on the right-hand side, who's responsible for doing it, right? And so, there's the what does the company need? And by the way, one of the things that I thought was so interesting about this particular research set, these were all unbiased respondents, but we asked people that were responsible for SaaS, different from the backup admins, right? And so it's always interesting when those two folks agree or disagree. And Ren, I thought it was really interesting that in this case, everybody seems to agree that central IT is defining the strategy. In fact, when you look, the data protection team is actually pretty low on that list. And yet, when it comes to who's responsible for actually enacting that strategy, for actually doing the backups of Office 365, the shoulders really come to the Office 365 admin, not central IT. Why do you think that is?
I want to say it's a completely different environment that you're working with. So you have a completely different set of skills when you're administering something like this than it does to take to know the knowledge to back up. One of the things that I like to tell anyone before they get into a product, if you're in charge of backup, call whoever is the vendor for that company, because they're more likely going to see ransomware more times in their life than you'll ever see ever in your existence. And getting those centralized documentation is usually a central IT job versus the SME that learned everything that they needed for e-discovery. They're not even aware of that side of the conversation because it's not a side of the conversation they normally have to have.
So I will admit to the folks at home, so I have been in the data protection space for 31 years. I have been backing stuff up for, I don't want to know how old you are, Rin, but I've been backing this up for a very, very, very long time, 31 years. And yet, when I decided I wanted to start playing with Office 365 and protecting for that, Rin actually had to help me configure my project. I have been able to go next, finish, and back up any app I've tried ever since mid-ranges and NetWare. And I needed Office 365 expertise in order to do that. And certainly what that taught me was it is such a different set of requirements. Who better to do those backups than the Office admin themselves? So I want to dig into a little bit more on the personas of how that works. But before we do that, let's go visit the map really quick. So folks have been piling on. More and more of the world has been turning green. Let's see if we take a look. So New York, I think, is up there in the corner. We got Germany. Let's go over to Europe. We got Czech Republic is in the house. UK turned green. Very, very good. Very good. If we keep going over, we got Pakistan was next to India. And how we doing in Africa? We got, is that Angola? And South Africa. I always give props to South Africa. They serve some of the best wine and meat that I know of on that continent. So welcome to everyone from there. The world continues to turn green. We need some Russians and some Brazil to turn on to get some balance on that. All right, let's keep digging in though. So we've talked about the need for, or the personas of who's responsible for doing that. Admittedly, in a lot of past IT lives, when you ask let's say the platform administrator to do backup, they're like, all I really need is I need to be able to revert back to a previous version. I think about things like Oracle DBAs and SQL DBAs. They're not thinking about retention. They're just thinking about if I import a table and I screw it up, I need to be able to get back to a known good state. So one of the other questions that we asked in this survey was, why do you think you should back up Office 365? Right? And I got to say, I kind of think they got it right. If we go to slide 3, the number one thing, of course, was axial deletion. And I guess the recycle bin kind of covers for that. But Ren, walk through some of these options, because there's a broad variety of things here that just holding or litigation does not address. Is that fair?
So there are some great features within Office 365 for data protection in a different facet. And we keep mentioning it, which is the recycling bins or the second stage storage. And yes, those are good in some pinches, but accidental deletion, 9 times out of 10, you don't realize until about 90 days out that you've deleted something that you need back. Once it's in there for 90 days, it's generally around the 30-day mark that it deletes and goes to maybe an archival retention, something like eDiscovery. And eDiscovery doesn't have that built-in feature to restore back to original environment. So yes, there is a recycling bin, but it's just like having a recycling bin on your desktop of your computer. If it gets emptied, you're still without that data at the end of the day. And I think that really highlights why accidental deletion is the worst, because as soon as you have to figure out how to get something from eDiscovery, which is a manual download process, and re-upload process to that end user somehow, you realize how impactful that can be. And then just going with the other types of attacks. So I think of the next two options as two sides of the same coin. A company's worst nightmare is going to be a rogue administrator. An administrator's worst nightmare is going to be something like ransomware, and just being prepared for those different types of malicious attacks.
So one of the things I think is interesting about that, Rin, is when you think about like a cyber attack where credentials have been stolen from an administrator, and that certainly takes us right to one of the big kind of cybersecurity scenarios. If the only thing you're relying on are the protection mechanisms within that platform, it's kind of like only relying on snapshots within a primary storage array, right? Because if you lose the array, you lose the primary data and you lose all the snapshots while you're there, right? And so certainly when you're leveraging only built-in mechanisms, you kind of have that same scenario, don't you?
You do. Plus, not everyone follows the best security practice. And one of the number one things that I found with most organizations, period, is your administrator is using that same administrator account for their everyday email that's signed into 6 or 7 different devices that just scope out your attack domain. I mean, it's layers of defense. Of course, having a backup, but also we could go into for days on different types of security best practices that are just overlooked all the time to see how vulnerable you are.
So the other thing that you taught me that truly was a mind blower just a couple weeks ago is, we often talk about, first of all, lately I've seen a lot of marketing folks that are kind of misnaming the idea of Office 365. It used to be that people used to think of Office 365 as being synonymous with Exchange Online. But now we're seeing there's Office 365 and then there's Microsoft 365. There's a much broad, and people are using a lot of those terms interchangeably. And I will say that I also was pretty guilty of, what the other SKUs, right? Because there's only 3 SKUs of Office 365. There's normal Office 365, and then there's plus e-litigation, and then plus discovery, and that's it. And then you showed me a chart, which I have brought up as slide 4. Which I was totally amazed. I had no idea that that's there. And by the way, this part of our segment is meant to show there's a huge amount of value that Microsoft is bringing. Backup just isn't part of it, right? There's a huge amount of stuff that's out there. I had never seen something done this succinctly before on a Microsoft licensing plan before, and I worked for Microsoft for 6 years. Would you mind just kind of walking through what this really means?
Yeah. So to set the stage for this, I remember when Jason asked me for this information, if I'd be willing to gather this for him. And I think he expected something right away, but I made you wait a couple of weeks because I wanted to make sure it got done right. And it was well worth the wait because it breaks down all of the different licenses that people don't understand. We keep talking about E's and M's and are you an O365 license now or not? Well, it's possible that you're somewhere in between, depending on what size of your business it is. And then you also have to think about the P plans, which are the Plan 1, Plan 2 versions of, say, Azure AD, which gives you those extra levels of security that get shoved into these other E's and M's plans. So to start off the left here, we have M365, which is your organizations that are over 300 users, and so are the EM365s here. So all of your E's are generally going to be over that 300 mark. If you have a much smaller organization, you actually don't even have an E license, you have an Office 365 plan. And I do have to say here, Jason, I think you fat fingered a 4 over at the end of there. There's no 4 at the end of EBO or O3654 in the middle.
Maybe it's possible.
But then there's also government plans, and we always hear about educational, but knowing that education is a completely different license sets that tailors their license to what's expected in the educational sector. And whether or not you need maybe Windows license is another completely different license set, but it's also an E365 license that they sell that also comes with Windows and things like Windows Defender. This isn't all of them either. This is just the main ones you'll see in the sector.
So a couple of things that kind of struck out for me on this. One, I truly did. I thought there was E1, E3, E5, and that's what everybody dealt with. And then E3 and E5 were simply synonymous. Now, those are the ones that certainly enterprises hear about the most. Let's go to one more slide in where I grabbed some of your just the E's, right? And I pulled them into something else. By the way, a couple things that you also taught me along the way. One, look at all the stuff that's in an E3 versus an E1. Look at all the stuff that's in an E5 versus an E3. Also, by the way, a 3 in an E does not mean a 3 in a G or a 3 in a P or a 3 in an A. So you would think that maybe this would be a grid, right? Segment is columns and then features is rows, and how cool would that be? And that's not true.
Nope. They actually tailor each of the government plans and the educational plans, and then the business, small business, and enterprise plans tailored to the type of business that they're selling to. If you are on the government side, you actually get less features sometimes, but more security on the back end. When it comes to educational, you may have more collaborative apps together because that's what the teachers need in those forms and things like that, versus, say, someone that's in a business that isn't really giving anyone quizzes. Maybe they're more concerned about being able to get from email access, which the E1 license, I want to call those a road warrior license. Like, you're never in front of a computer, you're on your phone. Those are your kiosk-based access to all the apps that you need every day. And then when you start to get into more of the E3 and E5 license, you're not just getting e-discovery. You're getting more storage. You're getting a desktop application. So if you do have an in-office, or Azure information protection for Office 365 is amazing to make sure maybe data loss protection is your biggest concern. That's what you get with your E3 license. It's not a backup, but you get a lot with each of these license sets.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I hope folks take away. And again, this is not a bashing. This is about, so two things that I think I heard you say. One, the actual line item features that you're seeing in each of these tiered SKUs is aligned to the needs of the customer, which is why they're not consistent from one segment category to another. As Microsoft has gone through the work of saying, okay, this is what a basic tier looks like for this kind of customer, SMB, government, academic, enterprise, whatever. And then here's how we package up the various features, which I guess in the back end is probably, check on, check off, before they figured out what these SKUs are going to turn into. But one thing is they're going to be customized towards the functionality requirements of that segment of users. And then secondly, but just take a look at all the other things that you get. So when we talk about that, you still need backup. Is there a little bit of blurriness between e-discovery, litigation hold, and then concepts like backup and long-term retention? Yes, there's a little bit of fuzziness there. But look at, even if that wasn't part of any of these SKUs, there would still be massive value to be gained by going to an E3 SKU or an E5 SKU without any backup at all. Is that fair?
That's completely fair. I'd also like to point out that we're looking at the E license, but there's an E O365 and an E M365. If we had it blown out for the O3 or the M365 E license, you actually get an entirely another set of features. One of the name being Windows. Windows comes with the M365 license versus the O365 license for that same E3, E5 plan. So it gets a little confusing when you get into it, but understanding the difference between an Office 365 suite and a Microsoft 365 suite license is going to be your physical devices.
Got it. All right, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so and that probably kind of brings us back to when we talked earlier about all the kinds of things that you need to protect for. If we go back to slide 3, let's go back to that list because there were a couple things that came off of that list that I think are interesting. Certainly talking about compliance and regulation. That's what about the fifth one down, where compliance and regs, those are things that actually you could cover or partially satisfy through a litigation hold or through a discovery. But there's a huge amount of other reasons why you do protection from this that those kinds of freezings may not do. One of the things I thought was really interesting, and it looks like both SaaS admins and backup admins agree, that fourth one on our list, better restoration capabilities than the built-in functions. Now, Rin, you mentioned earlier that when you are doing, litigation hold, you don't get to put it back where it came from. You get to basically suck it off to another, like a PST or some other kind of object, and you could manually reinstore it. But I'll tell you, from a BCDR perspective, that breaks legal chain of custody. I mean, that's not the same object going back in where it came from. Let's talk for a few minutes about what does restore really look like when you use backup as the basis of that. And I think you've got a slide for that too, what the breadth of recovery should look like for Office.
Yeah, so one of the things Veeam has done over time is we developed application explorers that were tailored to each of the applications that we were backing up on a mainstream level. And then we developed them into the Office 365 side. We've already been tailoring these with all end user and feedback to give all of the ways that you'd like to restore back to your original environments. Now, it's not just in raw data formats either. Their ability to export as PST or an MSG file with, say, Exchange documents versus coming over to documents and libraries when we're looking at SharePoint Online. We have these explorers tailored not just to get the data where you want it, but get the data back with the original metadata intact to these locations, which you were talking about chain of custody. That's what this can help provide.
Yeah, so this is where you're actually talking about true restore. And again, though, I will say, just looking at the myriad options that are available for restoration, this to me does make sense. Why is it that it's the Office 365 admin who's responsible for doing those recoveries? Because one of the things I love about the Explorers, and Veeam has been doing these Explorers for years, is you can do let's call it a generic backup. And yet, when you're doing restore, that restore is within the taxonomy of the app. Right. So when we're talking about on-prem, the SQL Explorer lets you see databases, right? The SharePoint Explorer lets you see sites. The Exchange Explorer lets you see mailboxes and items, but it's always within the taxonomy of that app. And certainly as a generic backup admin, I'm pretty good at backing up generic stuff. But understanding the nuances of how to restore data within the context of that app is a pretty big deal.
I would have to agree. One of my other favorite features is actually the ability that we built into our Explorers that you can email directly from that Explorer the file that you need to get to your end user for those cases that oh, I lost this file or accidentally deleted it. They may not know where the original location was to begin with. So you can actually satisfy a ticket request to your end user, like, here's your file, no searching necessary.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever lost a file where I didn't know where it came from. Oh, wait, yes, I have. And so has every other human who's ever touched a keyboard. All right, so we are coming up on pretty close to time. I want to bring the map back up again. By the way, we will typically see 3 to 5x number of views of this over the course of the week. So please continue to pile on. Mexico's in the house. Viva. Throughout the course of the week. So please keep piling on as to where you're from. We'd like to continue to welcome folks. I think Ireland also a little bit more of a turned green over there. Rin, I'm going to ask you to kind of give us our last words. I know you're going to be back again on Friday, so it's Ren week here at Veeam. And we'll talk about Office 365 all week long. For the next 2 weeks, I believe our colleague Dave Russell is going to be talking about cybersecurity on the Monday calls. He's going to be visiting with Jeff Riker, and then later with Edwin, talking about cyber and ransomware and those kinds of scenarios. But I'm going to give you the last word. When you're talking to a room full of Office 365 admins and their bosses, what do you just want to kind of go up and just kind of shake them and say, this is what you need to know? What's your final word?
Litigation hold is not backup. If they want to go into some of the details and the defining differences, restore. Litigation hold does not restore the way that is necessary to run an enterprise environment. That's not negotiable at this point. I think we've got that information out there. Understand your shared responsibility model. If you're not taking responsibility over your data, you are setting yourself up for a resume generating event. And I can detail you why. And if I had to leave on that, I think we'd be good.
Yeah, that was a mic drop moment. You're setting yourself up for a resume generating event. That is fantastic. Ren, thank you so much for joining us. For all those at home, thanks for watching this week. Be sure to tune back in on Friday where the technologists, including Ren, will be double clicking into more around Office 365. And in between, if you are a Microsoft partner, there's a lot of Veeam activity going on the Veeam featured partner landing page as part of Microsoft Inspire 2021. We hope to see you there as well. As always, thanks for watching.